Have you ever wondered how a therapist might navigate the delicate dance between Western psychological training principles versus the rich cultural tapestry of vibrant communities such as that in Jamaica? And what happens when feeling away, or how describing experiences in a physical manner is as valid enough of an explanation? How do we also translate psychological principles into everyday language for the communities in which we are serving? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Sun. Today, we are joined by Jessica Thompson, a counseling psychologist and co-owner at Centered, a group private practice in Kingston, Jamaica. Jessica holds a Master's of Science in Counseling Psychology from Northeastern University. Her commitment to personalized care is truly remarkable, as she studied feminist ecological models and cultural messages to adapting evidence-based therapies in her community in Jamaica. Now, prior to her work at Centered, Jessica provided project support for the Transitional Living Program for Children in State Care, a partnership with the government funded by USAID to develop and implement a standardized program for youth to successfully transition out of state care after the age of 18. Additionally, Jessica worked in public health facilities as a clinical psychologist. Now, taken together her journey and experience, Jessica draws from strength-based, holistic, and resilience-building approaches in working with her clients. She also empowers and fosters self-awareness within the Jamaican context. We're incredibly fortunate to have her here today to share her insights and wisdom. As a Black Jamaican psychologist, Jessica will be sharing her process of clinical adaptations of evidence-based therapies, lessons learned, and considerations to take in your own journey. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack. What a lovely introduction. I'm going to transcribe that so that I can use it too.
Well, I mean, this is incredible work. I mean, you went to the States, studied
Yes.
psychology, and then took that back to Jamaica and started your own center. Just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at your center.
Yeah, so my private practice is called Centered. We're located in Kingston, Jamaica. It's me, a counseling psychologist, and my business partner, who is a clinical developmental psychologist. She actually started the practice in 2015, and I joined in 2017. And we focus mostly on, or ethos is making mental health practical and accessible. And so everything we do, from individual interventions, family, group, we've done some corporate partnerships, we are aiming to make the concept and the practice of mental health very tangible. In Jamaica, there's still quite a bit of stigma around mental health, and our medical system is it's a very clinical model. And so mental health interventions are often very clinical, they're very medical model, and we try to be the opposite. We try to think about mental health, your emotional health, as just part of being a human. And that's really the core of our mission. And so a lot of what we do is in an attempt to destigmatize by doing quite a bit of psychoeducation, trying to normalize a range of different experiences. We personally tend not to diagnose. We take diagnoses into consideration, of course, but we tend to think of them more as a framework through which we can understand the client rather than like a disorder to be treated.
So you're navigating in essentially so many different systems, right? You're talking about the clinical language and changing it, or at least speaking to the clients in a more holistic way. Now, in Jamaica, I'm actually wondering about this because I'm not sure how the insurance system works in terms of diagnoses and the importance of that. How does that work over there? I'm actually curious.
Yeah, so we have a mixture of private and public healthcare, but I would say that most Jamaicans access healthcare through the public health system, which means that your treatment is pretty much free for the most part, depending on what you do, but you can let's say you need to connect with a psychiatrist, you can go to your nearest health center that has a psychiatrist on staff. You can find out what day they have mental health days. So let's say the second and the fourth Tuesdays of each month. You go, you register. Oftentimes you'll need a referral of some kind. So maybe that can come from a private doctor, a general practitioner, or it can come from the health center themselves. You hand in your referral, you get registered, and then you come on the second or the fourth Tuesday and you see the psychiatrist, you see the mental health nurses, you see the psychiatric nursing aides, you get the treatment that you need. If you need to be hospitalized, depending on where, then I think maybe there's a small fee, but most hospitals in Jamaica are government funded. And so like when I was working for public health, I was employed to the Ministry of Health. And so I was a salaried employee and I would travel to different clinics in a certain area in Jamaica. And so if you have private insurance, like for example, with my private practice, we don't take insurance up front, but depending on what private insurance plan you have, we can submit a form on your behalf and then you can get reimbursed for whatever percentage of the service your plan allows. But there are psychologists who are working for public health that you can just have an appointment. You can just go.
Oh, wow. Because I know you hear about some of the challenges here in the States with insurance companies and diagnoses, how you need a certain diagnosis in order to get reimbursed. Is that like that?
Well, honestly, on the health forms that I have signed, there's very basic diagnoses like anxiety or depression, and it's not something that necessarily stays with you, which I know is the concern in the US insurance system. It's very much just private data that is used to reimburse you. It is not something that is we don't have a centralized health record. And so nobody can go in and look up, oh, well, Jessica was diagnosed with this and that. I mean, I think that we have something called the National Health Fund, which that's a way to subsidize medication. So every Jamaican is entitled to an NHF card. Like I have an NHF card, and how that works is that you can get signed up through your doctor. So a doctor fills out a form for you to confirm, I have diagnosed Jessica with hypertension. I take that to the NHF office. They give me a card, and my card can be run to subsidized hypertension medication. And over the past, I would say maybe 10, 15 years, they've expanded to quite a few mental health diagnoses. So you can, under your NHF card, you can get subsidized for anxiety, depression, I believe some antipsychotic medication, I believe some mood stabilizers. They have a list of medications that you can get subsidized for.
Wow.
And so there are a few different avenues. Yeah, there's a few different avenues that you can get help.
Yeah, I mean, this is truly amazing. Sorry to detour from our initial conversation.
It's
I'm just so fascinated, and because U.S. healthcare system. I mean, the impact it has on mental health treatment, and so So let's talk a little bit about because you're running a group practice and you've had to in many ways learn about clinical adaptations, evidence-based therapies. Share with us your process because you know what that was like for you.
So the graduate program that I went to at Northeastern University, I really, really loved it. I really resonated with it. It was taught through the feminist ecological model, which means that it takes all aspects of the client's identity and context into consideration when figuring out a treatment plan. And I found that really resonated with me as somebody from, a place like Jamaica where there's just such a range of experiences and a range of backgrounds. And there are many Jamaicans who are very different from me, but then also many Jamaicans who are very like me. And I appreciate this conversation because I think that a lot of non-Jamaicans have one very specific image of Jamaicans. And so even to be able to share nuances of our healthcare system is really exciting to me because, people think of Jamaica as either this beach destination or a third world country. And so to hear that I can go to a clinic and see a psychiatrist on the same day really surprises people because it just comes with this mental baggage, the idea of Jamaica. And, when I lived in America, a lot of people had a hard time believing that I was Jamaican because I didn't really fit the stereotype of what I thought a Jamaican would be. But my graduate program was a very, I felt it equipped me to think of a whole client, which is something that I have carried with me to this day. But of course, because it's a US based program, you learn a lot about the US healthcare system and kind of how to fit psychology into that and how to fit your clinical work into that. And that didn't really resonate with me. But there were also certain theories and thoughts that were just a little too intangible.
Give me
Even
some examples.
something,
Yeah.
yeah, so even something like the unconscious mind, that is very theoretical. That is because you cannot locate the unconscious mind. You can't do a brain scan and you can find the unconscious mind. And so when I am explaining something like anxiety, I have to frame it as almost as if like anxiety lives in your brain. Anxiety is the body's response to threat. I have to make it very tangible and very practical because we just don't really talk that way. And I mean, even in terms of the emotional education, one of the therapy techniques that I learned was to have this line of questioning that sort of leads the client somewhere. And so I was explicitly told not to put words in a client's mouth. So not to suggest a thought or a feeling, because that's kind of imposing myself on that. But that relies on the client having that base knowledge in the first place, where in Jamaica, if you say you feel away, like I feel away, that is an explanation. I feel away about this. And based on the context, you can kind of deduce what way that is. But it's very rare for someone to even say, I feel angry. They might say more of like a physical sensation, like I feel hot. I feel right. Or if someone is describing themselves as a hothead, it means that they're very quick to anger. But the emotion words, and so I found that I had to be more leading, I suppose, or to kind of suggest certain things and frame it as, I'm thinking about myself in that situation and I would feel A or B or C. And then maybe they correct me, or maybe they say, yeah, that's exactly it. So that we can figure out what to do with those feelings. Because it's not that the feelings aren't there. It's just that they're these very kind of abstract sensations that don't actually have words.
Yeah. It's like you're helping the clients redefine the experience because there's terminologies that aren't often used and say,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like certain theories and interventions emphasize the emotionality of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying here is you're trying to maybe shift that way of thinking, or maybe also consider there's the emotional aspect. However, it's not going to resonate with this client. I need to think about how I would express this culturally.
Right. And then because there is still quite a stigma around mental health, to even admit that something is going on, to even consider going to therapy, to even go to therapy is a very vulnerable experience. I mean, I know that it's vulnerable for anyone, but it's particularly vulnerable for a population that still has that messaging of something is wrong with you, or, you've lost your mind, or this is something that you can't tell people about. And so I do find that I have also learned to be very focused on what can I leave this client with, because people are coming to me looking for solutions. It's not that traditional talk therapy, you're in psychotherapy for years. And I mean, I love that. There are clients that I can do that with and who see therapy in that way. But for the most part, many of my clients I see 1 or 2 times. And this is very focused on what do I do? How do I do it? What's next? And so because I kind of prefer a psychodynamic orientation, I have had to adjust that, and I have had to update it, and I have had to learn how to build rapport quickly, because one of my big messages today is that because the success of therapy relies on rapport building has to be cultural. And I had to adjust the way that I learned how to talk to clients, how I learned to gain their trust in order to be more culturally relevant, so
I
that
want
I
to,
can connect with them and then help them in whatever way they need.
that is so profound. Rapport building is cultural.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be written in a textbook because I've never read that. I've never read or heard that. Rapport building is
No,
cultural. Wow. Wow.
no, and I never, and I suppose I didn't think about it I knew that intuitively because I'm even thinking about back in grad school, one of my professors, we were having a conversation about clinical skills and we were talking about eating in session and the kind of what's quote unquote appropriate and what's normal. And I said, well, it's not abnormal for Jamaicans to share a drink together or to have tea together or something like that. And I was trying to imagine what my teachers were telling me was, how to set up your room and how to make it a therapeutic space. And it just didn't really connect with me because we're just a very informal, community-driven people. And so it's not strange. Like, for example, I had a client who stopped at a cafe before they came to session and just brought me a pastry because they were buying themselves a pastry and they brought me a pastry. And that wasn't a matter of, I'm told that accepting things from clients shifts the power dynamic, but that was a matter of having manners. But if I'm showing up somewhere, I have to be bringing something because I can't show up and eat my pastry and then not offer you anything. That's just being a well-mannered individual. In Jamaica, you'd say that you grow good, like somebody grew you up with manners. and it's just something that we don't really think twice about.
Yeah, I know
But
for here, it's like my heart is just racing, just thinking, well, what am I going to do? I bring
yeah, exactly.
pastries.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, you always want to operate ethically. And so if a client mentions bringing something or having a gift of some kind, I've had to, tactfully redirect or just let them know that, no, that's not necessary. Like one Christmas, a client who ran a skincare company said, oh, I want to put together a package for you. And I said, oh, that's so thoughtful of you. I really appreciate the sentiment, but therapists are not really meant to accept gifts, but I will accept the thought. And I take it as such an honor that you think highly of me in that way.
Oh gosh, that's so sweet. And just delicately just like rechanneled that gift into a different context. Like just thinking about someone in itself is a gift. Wow.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And
Hmm.
but if that person had already dropped it off, giving it back would be offensive.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Returning it would be offensive. It would likely lead to some sort of embarrassment. And so then it becomes a bit murky because you want to preserve, all of this is about preserving the connection.
Yeah.
And if I say no to something that they've already given me, then it's too rigid. It's too, it just reflects poorly. It might make them think that I think poorly of them.
Mm. So a lot of what's being discussed, I'm thinking about the different theories and treatment approach. It totally makes sense in a psychodynamic framework
Mm-hmm.
as we're investigating, gift giving, this type of boundary, cultural interaction. Can you share with us other evidence-based therapies or treatments that you noticed that, I had to make some adaptations here or there?
Mm-hmm. So the one that's immediately coming to mind is somatic therapy. And I think that, I mean, speaking of psychodynamic, we're very concerned with the unconscious mind, and somatic therapy to me is tied in with that because it really targets these unconscious processes of your nervous system. But a lot of the terminology is just so abstract. A lot of it is so, and some of the exercises, you just feel ridiculous. You just
So
feel ridiculous.
tell me,
Like,
what are some of the exercises?
well, even
For
things like
for folks who
humming.
are not familiar with somatic therapy. Yeah.
Right. So you want to be stimulating various parts of your nervous system. So there might be humming, making certain sounds, shaking your body in certain ways. And these are things that I have tried, and I practice yoga. And so I kind of was introduced to somatic interventions through that. And I do breathing exercises and all of that. And it is something that I believe in. But for many clients, I have to package it a little differently. I just have to, I can't get too deep into the terminology or even explaining how it works. I might just say that a lot of stuff is stored in your nervous system. And this is an exercise that can help to release things in your nervous system. All of your emotions get stuck in there, and keep it a little bit more, maybe even a little more surface, but also very practical. And the techniques that I will teach are very short, like a 1 minute breathing exercise, versus many somatic interventions are like, a 25-minute meditation, which that just is not, we're just not going to do that. That's not
Yeah.
going to
It's like
resonate.
you're
Yeah.
not even going into the history and origin of the trauma, of how the trauma is stored in certain, like, let's say someone was physically abused and how they were
Hmm.
physically abused may have affected certain parts of the body. You're not even
Hmm.
going in depth with
No,
that kind of conversation.
no,
Yeah. Wow.
no, no. We're not even talking about that. We're keeping it very, as I said, just practical. A lot of people want to come away with something, especially as I mentioned before, since coming to therapy is such a vulnerable thing already. I'm already really putting myself out here. I need to I need to justify this to myself. I need to come away with something.
Yeah. Gosh, these are so important tips. So, what are some other considerations you like our listeners, most who are therapists, what other considerations would you like them to take away in their own journey?
Yeah, I think that, generally, maybe relaxing the ideal of what therapy needs to be. That's also something that I have had to think about and reconsider in my own career, because having been taught the psychodynamic therapy, having been exposed to many different clinical methods, I did find myself being frustrated early in my career back in Jamaica. I came back to Jamaica in 2015, and I found myself being frustrated and just believing that I wasn't really helping people. I wasn't really doing anything because maybe I wasn't getting very many return clients. Maybe there was a seemingly high turnover, but there's many times when people get what they need after one or two sessions. They get what they're looking for. Maybe it's feedback, maybe it's just to say something out loud so that they don't feel so alone. Maybe it's some normalizing, maybe it's to hear, really any kind of perspective. And the return, the frequency doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of how you've been impactful for that person.
Yeah. Too often we think about return or the frequency of the
Hmm.
visits. And of course,
Hmm.
it all depends on what type of condition or situation you're coming in for.
Hmm. Hmm.
Acuity, as well as, like, again, the diagnosis. We're just using terms here. And so, Jessica, I mean, for you to take this journey, right, to go to States, learn the psychological treatments, and then
Hmm.
take that to your community, that's a long journey. So, can you share with us any memorable events and circumstances that influenced how you got into this work?
How I got into this work. So, I mean, even this is making me tense up a little bit because it's a personal story. And, as psychotherapists, we are told to be, I still have that blank slate as the ideal. And
Yes,
it's,
our clients
it's,
can't know
it's,
anything about us.
no, exactly. We're not meant to know anything. And, even just recently, a client asked me what high school I went to, and I froze, which you would think that doesn't necessarily need to be such a personal thing. But I started my introduction to psychology was as a client when I was a teenager. Like many teenagers, I experienced a depressive episode, and so my parents took me to a psychiatrist, and that was really the first time that I had heard of mental health. And I tried medication. I was on medication for a little bit, but my visits with him were, I don't recall exactly how long I was even seeing him or what frequency, but I just remember that my visits with him were a lot of talking, and I felt very confused by that because I was like, and I don't even know how old he was at the time, but because I was a teenager, everyone is old, and so I was just like, why am I just going to talk to this old man? What is happening here? But then over time, I started to feel differently, and I started to feel like this adult cared about me. And that was a really profound event for me. When you're depressed, your brain tells you all sorts of awful things. And the adults in my life who cared about me were my family. But here is this non-family member who seems to really take an interest in me, seems to really believe in me. He thought that I was very intelligent, and he even shared a few things about, his own life. Like I remember him telling me about his dog and his children and his grandchild, and I felt a little included. I felt like, oh, this could be something. I just felt good. And I didn't really understand what was happening, but he did tell me this is what psychiatry means, this is what mental health means, this is what psychology means. And that was my introduction. And maybe because he seemed very smart, I was like, oh, this is maybe a smart person thing to like be concerned with other people. And so when I went to undergrad, I decided to go to undergrad in Florida, because in Jamaica, when you enter university, you enter on a certain major. So I would apply to, let's say I wanted to study economics, I apply to the economics faculty and I'm accepted into economics. You can't go in undeclared, or universities are modeled off of the UK system in that way. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided to go to Florida, where I had family, and I was undeclared. And so I tried a psychology course because of my experience with a psychiatrist. And I just found it to be very natural, it sort of fit. And I felt like I understood it. And so I kept taking it. And, honestly, my path to therapy was a little bit of trial and error, in that I was trying a bunch of things, and then I tried psychology and I liked it. So then I studied psychology. And then I went back home to Jamaica for a year after undergrad because I didn't really know what next. And I taught preschool for the year because my family friend ran a preschool and she needed a teacher. So she asked me and I said yes. And I really enjoyed that, but it wasn't something that I could see myself doing for a really long time. So then I started to research master's programs in psychology, and I found counseling psychology, and I thought, oh, that could be fun because I don't like research. That's not really me.
Mhm.
So I knew that I had to do something with, clinical, and counseling psychology sounded like it could be kind of fun. You talk to people for a living, no 2 days are the same. There's enough variation. And it seemed applicable enough that even if I wasn't a practicing psychologist forever, there's maybe skills I could use for something else. So then that led me to Northeastern, and that program it really fit. I really loved my time. I hated winter, but I loved Boston in the summer, and I loved my program. I loved my faculty members. I loved my classmates. That was really transformative. And then because I'm only a Jamaican citizen, I knew that I was unlikely to get a US work visa because of the way that work visas are set up. And so I said, okay, well, I have 1 year that I'm allowed to be in the US after my graduate program. Why not live somewhere fun? So then I moved to LA, where I have a cousin over there. So I lived in LA for a year, and I worked for a company called Step Up on Second, and I was working with their transitional age youth program. So it's a nonprofit that is focused on supporting homeless, chronically mentally ill people in Los Angeles. And I was assigned to their youth program, where I was working with young people up to age 25 who were chronically homeless and severely mentally ill. And so I was kind of thrown into the deep end, but I really appreciated that because, I loved my coworkers. I loved LA. LA is really fun, and the weather really suited me. But I just learned so much. I learned so much. Working with such a severe population just taught me that I really have to trust myself. It taught me that I can handle a lot more than I ever thought I could. It taught me to be kind of fearless in a way, because even now I'm confronted by difficult clinical situations, and I think, well, I've done a suicide intervention on the streets of LA. I think I can handle this in the comfort of my office. So I do really think that that particular experience, having it at the time that I did, set me up for a really successful clinical life. It was one of those jobs that I still think about now, and this was maybe 11, 12 years ago.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing this. I would imagine, like you said, we're not used to disclosing,
No, we're not.
our journey, and to make it very personal, I really appreciate you sharing this. So, as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
It's interesting because growing up in Jamaica, which is a majority Black country, I just didn't think of it that much. I really did not think about my racial or even ethnic identity that much until I left my country. And that's when it really came into sharp focus because, of course, when most people around you share at least one of your identities, there's no real contrast. And so there isn't much to think about. But then when I went to the US, being non-American, sounding different, even looking different, it was really confusing and overwhelming experience. But at the time, I kind of thought of living in America as this study abroad. It was this grand adventure. I was approaching it like, oh, this isn't really my real life, And so I do have these questions around. There's so much about US culture that I didn't really understand and that I didn't expect to not understand because most of my family lives in the US. And so I have visited the US throughout my life. Since I was like a baby, basically, I've been visiting the US almost every year. So I thought, oh, this is just a place I know, I understand it. But then I didn't realize that when I went to the US, I was visiting my Jamaican family in the US. I wasn't around anyone else. And so it was being an international student, being a student of color, I think that was confusing. But I was able to, I think I had the benefit of knowing who I was and being comfortable with who I was because I grew up in Jamaica and I have a strong national identity. And up until 18, I had only ever lived in Jamaica. And, everyone in my family is Jamaican, other than the cousins born in the US. I mean, my parents, my grandparents, their parents, their parents. So I had a strong enough sense of self that there was something for me to return to, even when I felt confused or when there were these questions.
That is so beautifully stated because it's not like you were here and essentially your identity and history was taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So,
no, no. And
mm,
also, I mean, Jamaica has a really large diaspora, and I was always in a major city, and so there was always tastes of home. I could always find a Jamaican restaurant. I could always, and I didn't really go to places in the US that I didn't know anybody. So I tried to make sure that I always had access to some sort of community. And certainly my parents and my family felt better knowing that I was in the US, being close by to someone or somewhere.
so for you, what does it mean to be a Black Jamaican psychologist?
If I'm honest, I don't think about it very much because I am in Jamaica and because most people are Black or mixed or something in Jamaica. So I don't really think about it, but I do think that it's very meaningful to me to be part of an evolving and developing field in Jamaica, and something that has been historically underdeveloped and something that people have struggled to understand. And so to be a part of a community that I think, a community of healthcare, of community support, of being helpful, that I think can ultimately have some sort of impact on my people. I mean, a value of mine has always been to contribute to Jamaica and to make Jamaica better. And so, in that respect, it's something that I really cherish, and it's something that I'm very grateful that I get to do because, I always say that if there's one person, hopefully it's more than one, but if there's one person who thinks of mental health differently, who thinks of their emotions differently, who allows themselves to feel and to be more of themselves and to be less judgmental because of me, then that's what I want from my career.
So, Jessica, how do we support you?
Well, continue supporting destigmatization overall, because ultimately I think that supports all of our mission as psychologists and certainly Centered's mission in Jamaica. We want people to think if you have a brain, then you have mental health. It is something for you to consider. How to take care of your mental and your emotional health, not just your physical health. That's a people thing. That's a human thing. That's what we want our impact to be. And you can also check us out. You can go to our website. We have a resource page. We're very proud of trying to produce content from within Jamaica because there's a lot of mental health content in the world, but we have found that a lot of our people locally are getting content from abroad that isn't necessarily specific to our setting. So even we talked about the healthcare system earlier. And so I've had clients come to me and say, oh, it's so hard to get an appointment with a psychiatrist. And I said, where have you looked? And they said, oh, well, I saw a TikTok of the process. And I said, well, wait, where was that person located? Because of course, different countries have different healthcare systems. And so they don't even know that you can just call a private doctor in Jamaica and see a psychiatrist the next day if they have an availability. And so for us, having that presence so that we can be providing information is something that we try really hard to do.
Wow. Well, Jessica, this is such incredible and important and needed work to demystify, therapy, and also to make it culturally relevant to the community you're serving, and to really help clients in a way that just makes sense. It's hard we can't just expect that we're going to take an intervention and speak the language of the intervention to communities that it doesn't resonate with.
Yeah.
So and also, like you said, to produce content for a lot of your clients, because they're getting materials, say on TikTok, that isn't even applicable to Jamaica. It just doesn't make sense. So really, for you to do this type of groundwork is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing with us your insight today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm so grateful that you wanted to meet and that you were willing to have me on. So thank you.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.